A powerful cattle baron walked away from everything, his name, his fortune, his empire, just to answer one haunting question. Could anyone love him when he was nothing? He became a nameless laborer at the orchard of a woman her own family despised. She carried every burden in silence, never knowing the man beside her was hiding a secret that could destroy everything. When the truth exploded, she forced him to leave. But he came back, this time without the lies, without the disguise, ready to face what he'd been running from all along. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really worth. If you want to see how far this story travels, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. Now let's begin. The market square in Bridger's Hollow smelled like dust and livestock, and the particular kind of sweat that came from men who'd been working since dawn. Landon Pierce stood near the edge of it, his boots clean, his coat tailored, his presence like a stone dropped in still water. People moved around him differently. Not out of respect exactly, more like the way you'd step around a fence post you knew would hurt if you walked into it. He wasn't there to buy anything. He'd come because his foreman had mentioned some kind of dispute over grazing rights, and Landon had learned early that showing up in person usually ended disputes faster than lawyers did. But the dispute had been settled before he arrived. One look at his rig pulling up had been enough, and now he was just standing there, half listening to his foreman talk about herd rotation, watching the crowd. That's when he saw her. She was across the square, standing beside a wagon loaded with crates of apples. The fruit looked good, clean, polished, the kind of care that took time. But nobody was buying. A man stood in front of the wagon, loud enough that his voice carried over the general noise, and Landon realized after a moment that the man was yelling at her. "You think you can just show up here and undercut everyone else?" the man said. His face was red, veins standing out on his neck. "You think that's how this works?" The woman didn't answer. She just stood there, hands folded in front of her, looking at the ground. "I asked you a question, Clara." Still nothing. Landon's foreman was still talking, something about fence repair, but Landon wasn't listening anymore. He was watching the way the woman, Clara, stood perfectly still, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. The man in front of her wasn't done. "Your apples aren't better than anyone else's," he said. "You're just trying to make the rest of us look bad. And for what? So you can feel like you're worth something?" A few people had stopped to watch. Not many. Most kept moving, eyes sliding past the scene like it was something they'd seen before and didn't need to see again. "Answer me," the man said. Clara lifted her head slightly. Her voice, when it came, was so quiet Landon almost didn't hear it. "I'm sorry, Papa." The word landed like a slap. The man, her father, shook his head in disgust. "Sorry doesn't sell apples. Sorry doesn't fix the fact that you embarrass me every time you open your mouth." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there beside the wagon, alone. Landon felt something twist in his chest. He didn't know what it was. Anger, maybe. Or something worse. Recognition. He'd seen people humiliated before. He'd done it himself, more times than he cared to count. Business was business. You didn't get where he was by being soft. But standing there, watching this woman try to make herself smaller, watching her father walk away like she was nothing, it bothered him more than it should have. "Mr. Pierce?" His foreman was looking at him, waiting. "Yeah," Landon said. "Let's go." But he didn't move right away. He kept watching as Clara began unloading the apples herself, lifting the crates down from the wagon one at a time, her movements careful and deliberate, like she was used to working alone. Nobody helped her. That night, Landon couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the books on the shelf without reading a single spine. His house was too big. He'd always known that, but tonight it felt worse, like the walls were accusing him of something. He thought about Clara, about the way she'd apologized to a man who didn't deserve it, about the way she'd stood there and taken it, not because she was weak, but because… what? Because she'd learned there was no point in fighting back? He thought about his own life, the land he owned, the cattle, the men who worked for him, who called him sir and meant it, who wouldn't dream of talking to him the way Clara's father had talked to her. And he thought about the question that had been sitting in the back of his mind for longer than he wanted to admit. Would any of them respect me if I didn't have the land? He already knew the answer. They respected the power, not the man. And maybe that was fine. Maybe that was how the world worked. but it also meant he'd never know if anyone, if any woman, could look at him and see something worth loving that wasn't tied to what he owned. He finished the whiskey, poured another. By the time the sun came up, he'd made a decision that would have sounded insane if he'd said it out loud. But he didn't plan on saying it out loud. He didn't plan on telling anyone. He was going to disappear. It took 3 days to arrange. He told his foreman he was going east to look at some property, that he'd be gone a few weeks, maybe a month. He left instructions, detailed ones, and made it clear that anyone who bothered him while he was gone had better have a damn good reason. Then he packed a single bag, left his fine coat hanging in the closet, and rode out before dawn. The clothes were the first thing. He bought them in a town 2 days' ride from Bridger's Hollow, a place where nobody knew his face. Work pants, a plain shirt, a hat that had seen better days, boots that were scuffed and worn. He paid cash and didn't make conversation. He looked at himself in the mirror of the boarding house room and barely recognized what he saw. Good. The second thing was the name. Landon Pierce was a name people knew. It carried weight. It opened doors and closed mouths and made men nervous. He needed something that didn't do any of that. Something forgettable. Evan Cole. Simple. Common. The kind of name you heard and forgot 5 minutes later. He practiced saying it out loud, letting it settle into his mouth like a new habit. By the time he rode into Bridger's Hollow a week after he'd left, he almost believed it himself. The orchard sat at the edge of town, a sprawling mess of apple trees that looked like they'd been there longer than most of the buildings. Evan, he reminded himself, stood at the end of the dirt road that led up to the house, taking it in. The trees were healthy, but the place had the worn-down look of somewhere that was holding on by sheer stubbornness. Fences needed mending. The barn leaned slightly to one side. The house itself was small, plain, the kind of place that didn't waste energy on decoration. A woman was working near one of the trees, a ladder propped against the trunk, a canvas sack slung over her shoulder. Even from a distance, he recognized her. Clara. He took a breath and started walking. She didn't notice him until he was halfway across the yard. When she did, she stopped mid-reach, one hand still stretched toward a branch, and looked down at him. "Help you?" she said. Her voice was the same as it had been in the market, quiet, careful, like she was used to people not listening. "Looking for work," Evan said. "Heard you might need a hand." She studied him for a moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see straight through him, but then she just shook her head. "Can't afford to pay much." Didn't ask how much. That got her attention. She climbed down the ladder, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from doing the same task 1,000 times. Up close, he could see the calluses on her hands, the dirt under her nails, the way her shoulders carried a weight that had nothing to do with the apples in her sack. "You know anything about orchards?" she asked. "No." "Livestock?" "Some." "Fixing things?" "Depends on what's broken." She almost smiled. Almost. "Most things around here are broken." "Then I guess I'll learn." She looked at him for a long moment, and he wondered if she was going to turn him away. He wouldn't have blamed her. He was a stranger, showing up out of nowhere, offering to work for next to nothing. It didn't make sense, but then she nodded, just once. "You can start tomorrow, dawn. Don't be late." "Yes, ma'am." She turned back to the ladder, dismissing him, but as he walked away he heard her voice, quieter this time. "Name's Clara Whitmore." He stopped, looked back. Evan Cole. She didn't say anything else, just climbed back up the ladder and went back to work, like he'd already ceased to exist. Evan, walked back down the road, his heart beating harder than it should have been, and wondered what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. The boarding house in town was cheap and smelled like boiled cabbage, but the bed was clean and the landlady didn't ask questions. Evan paid for a week up front and spent the rest of the evening sitting by the window, watching the street below and thinking about the morning. He'd worked before. Of course he had. You didn't run a cattle operation without getting your hands dirty. But this was different. This wasn't his land, his cattle, his men following his orders. This was him, alone, working for someone who didn't know who he was and didn't care. It should have felt like a step down. It didn't. It felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. Dawn came cold and clear. Evan was at the orchard 10 minutes early, his breath misting in the air, his hands already stiff from the chill. Clara was already working, of course she was, mucking out the barn like it was something she did before most people were awake. She glanced at him when he approached, didn't say good morning, just nodded toward a pile of tools leaning against the barn wall. "Fence on the east side's down," she said. "Needs posts reset and wire replaced. You'll find what you need in the shed." "Got it." She went back to shoveling, and he went to find the shed. The fence was worse than she'd made it sound. 3 posts had rotted through at the base, and the wire was so rusted it crumbled when he touched it. He spent the first hour just clearing out the old materials, his shoulders burning, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cold. By midday, he'd reset 1 post. 1. Clara came by around noon, carrying 2 tin cups and a canteen of water. She handed him one without a word, and they stood there in silence, drinking. "You're slow," she said finally. "Yeah." "But you're doing it right." He looked at her, surprised. She didn't meet his eyes, just drank her water and stared out at the trees. "Most men try to rush it," she said. "Then it falls apart in a month and I have to do it over." "I'm not most men." She glanced at him then, something unreadable in her expression. "No? I guess you're not." She took his empty cup and walked back toward the house, leaving him standing there, feeling like he'd just passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. The days blurred together after that. Up before dawn, work until dark, collapse into bed, and do it again. The fence took a week. After that, Clara had him repairing the barn roof, then clearing irrigation ditches, then hauling crates during harvest. She worked beside him most days, never asking him to do anything she wasn't willing to do herself. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was always direct, no wasted words. He learned quickly that she carried the entire orchard on her back. Her father showed up maybe twice in the first 2 weeks, always with some complaint, always leaving before he could be asked to help. Her younger brother was worse. He'd stop by just long enough to take whatever money Clara had managed to scrape together, making promises he never kept. And through it all, Clara just kept working. Steady, relentless. Like she'd accepted long ago that no one was coming to help and made her peace with it. It made Evan furious in a way he couldn't quite explain. One evening, after her brother had left with half the week's earnings, Evan found her sitting on the porch steps, her head in her hands. "You don't have to give him that money," he said. She didn't look up. "Yes, I do." "Why?" "Because he's family." "Family doesn't mean you let them bleed you dry." She lifted her head then, and the look she gave him was so tired it hurt to see. "You don't know what it's like." "Then tell me." For a moment, he thought she might, but then she just shook her head and stood up. "Get some rest, Evan. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She went inside, and he sat there on the steps alone, staring out at the darkening orchard, hating himself for not knowing what to say. 3 weeks in, something shifted. Clara started trusting him with more, bigger tasks, harder decisions. She'd ask his opinion on which trees needed pruning, whether a piece of equipment was worth fixing or replacing. She still didn't talk much, but the silence between them felt different now, comfortable. He caught himself watching her sometimes, the way she moved through the orchard like she was part of it, her hands sure and steady even when the rest of her looked ready to collapse. She was stronger than anyone he'd ever known, and she didn't even seem to realize it. One afternoon, they were working side by side, clearing fallen branches after a storm, when she suddenly stopped. "Why are you here, Evan?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you show up out of nowhere. You work harder than anyone I've ever hired, and you never complain. Nobody does that unless they're running from something." His throat went dry. "Maybe I just needed the work." "Maybe." She looked at him, really looked at him, and he felt like she could see every lie he'd ever told. "But I don't think that's it." He didn't know what to say. The truth was impossible. A lie felt worse. "I'm not running from the law, if that's what you're worried about," he said finally. She almost smiled. "Didn't think you were. You're too careful for that." She picked up another branch, tossed it onto the pile. "Just don't bring your trouble to my door, whatever it is." "I won't." She nodded, like that settled it, and went back to work. But Evan stood there for a moment longer, the weight of his secret heavier than any fence post he'd carried, and wondered how much longer he could keep it buried. So a month passed, then two. Evan stopped thinking about his old life. Or he tried to anyway. Some mornings he'd wake up and forget, just for a second, that he was supposed to be someone else. He'd think about checking in with his foreman, about the cattle, about the deals he'd left hanging. Then he'd remember where he was and why, and the old life would feel distant, like something that had happened to someone else. He liked the work. That was the strangest part. It was hard, harder than anything he'd done in years, but it was also simple. You fixed a fence, and the fence stayed fixed. You hauled water, and the trees grew. There was no negotiating, no posturing, no wondering if someone was lying to your face because they wanted something from you. And there was Clara. He didn't know when it had started exactly. Maybe it had been there from the beginning, that day in the market when he'd watched her apologize to a man who didn't deserve her breath. Or maybe it had grown slowly, day by day, as he watched her carry a burden no one should have to carry alone. All he knew was that somewhere along the way, he'd stopped thinking about whether anyone could love him without his name. He'd started wondering if she could. It happened on a Tuesday. They were in the barn, organizing supplies for the winter, when Clara's father showed up. Evan heard his voice before he saw him, loud, demanding, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. "Where's the money from last week's sales?" Clara was on a ladder, reaching for a box on the top shelf. She didn't come down. "I used it to fix the irrigation pump." "You used it?" Her father's voice cracked like a whip. "That money was supposed to go toward next month's land payment." The pump was broken. Without it, there's no harvest. Without a harvest, there's no money for anything. "Don't you lecture me about how this works." Evan stepped forward without thinking. "She's right." The barn went silent. Clara's father turned slowly, looking at Evan like he'd just noticed a rat in the corner. "Who the hell are you?" "He works here," Clara said quickly, climbing down the ladder. "Papa, I asked him, not you." Evan met the older man's eyes and kept his voice level. "Name's Evan Cole. I work for Clara, and she's right about the pump." "Nobody asked for your opinion, boy. You're in her barn. Everything here is her opinion." Clara's father took a step closer, his jaw tight. "You've got a mouth on you. And you've got a daughter who's keeping this place running while you show up just long enough to criticize. Seems like you should be thanking her, not yelling." For a second, Evan thought the man might take a swing at him, but then Clara stepped between them, her voice quiet but firm. "Papa, please go." Her father stared at her, something ugly twisting in his expression. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the barn door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara stood there, her back to Evan, her shoulders rigid. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yeah, I did. He's my father. And he treats you like you're nothing." She turned then, and the look on her face stopped him cold. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Resignation. "You think I don't know that?" she said quietly. "You think I haven't spent my whole life knowing that?" She shook her head. "But he's still my father. And this is still my life. And you don't get to—" She stopped. Took a breath. "Just stay out of it," she said. "Please." And then she walked past him, out of the barn, leaving him standing there with the weight of his mistake pressing down on his chest. Mom. She didn't speak to him for 3 days. They still worked. The orchard didn't stop needing attention just because they weren't talking. But the easy silence was gone. Now it was just uncomfortable, a gulf between them that Evan didn't know how to cross. He tried apologizing. She waved him off. He tried explaining. She walked away. On the 4th day, he found her sitting under one of the apple trees, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring at nothing. He sat down beside her without asking permission. "I'm sorry," he said. "You already said that." "I know, but I mean it." She was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, "My father's not a good man. I know that. I've always known that. But he's the only family I've got, and if I push him away, I'll have nothing. You'd have the orchard. The orchard is his, legally. I just work it. If he wanted to, he could sell it tomorrow and I couldn't stop him." She pulled a blade of grass, twisted it between her fingers. "So yeah, I let him yell. I let him take the money. I let him make me feel small. Because the alternative is losing the only thing I've ever loved." Evan's chest ached. "That's not right." "No, it's not. But it's the truth." She looked at him then, and her eyes were dry but hollow. "You can't fix this, Evan. Nobody can." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that there had to be a way, that she deserved better, that she shouldn't have to live like this. But he didn't. Because she was right. He couldn't fix it. Not as Evan Cole, a drifter with no money and no name. And he couldn't tell her the truth without destroying whatever fragile trust they'd built. So he just sat there beside her under the apple tree, hating himself and hating the world and wondering how much longer he could keep lying to the only person who'd ever made him want to tell the truth. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell in late October, a thin dusting that turned the orchard into something out of a painting. Clara worked through it like she worked through everything else, her breath misting in the cold air, her hands red and raw. Evan worked beside her, and slowly, painfully, they found their way back to something like friendship. She started talking to him again, not about her father, not about the things that hurt, but about small things, the trees, the weather, a joke her brother had told when they were kids. And Evan listened and tried not to think about the fact that every word she spoke to him was built on a lie. One night, after a particularly long day, they sat by the fire in the house, her house, though she always seemed surprised when he called it that. She made coffee, strong and bitter, and they drank it in silence. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Sure." "What made you come here, really?" He stared into his cup, watching the steam rise. The truth sat on his tongue, heavy and impossible. "I wanted to know if I could be worth something," he said, "without all the things I used to think made me worth something." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw something soft in her eyes, something almost like understanding. "And?" she said. "Are you?" He met her gaze. "I don't know yet." She smiled then, a real smile, small but genuine, and it hit him like a punch to the chest. "I think you are," she said quietly. And Landon Pierce, the man who'd built an empire on power and control, felt something crack open inside him that he didn't know how to name. That smile stayed with him longer than it should have. Days later, Evan was still thinking about it while hauling firewood from the shed to the house, the cold biting through his gloves, his breath coming in white clouds. Clara had smiled at him. Not the polite half-curve she gave customers at the market, but something real, something that suggested she saw him, actually saw him, and didn't find him wanting. It terrified him more than any business deal ever had. The firewood clattered against the porch as he dropped the load. Clara appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's enough for today," she said. "Come inside before you freeze to death out here." He followed her in, grateful for the warmth. The house was small but orderly, everything in its place, the kind of space where nothing was wasted and everything served a purpose. She poured him coffee without asking, set the cup on the table, and took the chair across from him. "You're getting better at this," she said. "At what? Not freezing?" "At all of it." She wrapped her hands around her own cup. "When you first showed up, I figured you'd last maybe a week. Soft hands, no calluses. I thought you were running from a woman or a debt, and either way you'd be gone before the first snow. What changed your mind?" "You didn't leave." She said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "And your hands aren't soft anymore." He looked down at them. She was right. The calluses had built up slowly, the kind you couldn't fake. Blisters had come and gone, layers of skin toughening until his palms looked like they belonged to someone who'd worked with them his whole life. "You work harder than anyone I've ever hired," Clara continued, "and you don't complain. Not once. Not even when I know I'm asking too much. You never ask too much. I ask everything. That's the problem." She stared into her coffee. "My father used to hire men in the summer, back when the orchard made enough money to afford it. They'd work maybe 3 days before they figured out what the job actually was, and then they'd find some excuse to leave. Too hot, too hard. Pay wasn't good enough. Always something. And you'd finish their work yourself. Had to. The trees don't care if you're tired or if your help quit." She glanced at him. "But you stayed. Even after you saw what it was like. Why?" The question hung between them, and Evan felt the weight of the lie pressing down on his chest. He could tell her the surface truth, that he'd needed to prove something to himself, or he could tell her the deeper truth, the one that was becoming harder to ignore, that somewhere in the last 2 months, This had stopped being about answering a question and started being about her. "I like the work," he said instead. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. "And I like working for someone who knows what they're doing." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing what has to be done." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not." She set her cup down, and something in her voice had changed. "Knowing what you're doing means you chose this. I didn't choose any of it. The orchard was my grandfather's, then my father's, and now it's mine, except it's not really mine because my name isn't on the deed. I'm just the one who keeps it alive because no one else will." "Then put your name on it." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Clara stood, walked to the window, stared out at the snow-covered trees. "Because my father would rather sell it to strangers than give it to me. Because in his eyes, I'm just the daughter who's supposed to get married and make this someone else's problem. And because even if I could afford a lawyer, even if I could fight him in court, it would take years and cost more than I'll ever have." Evan's jaw tightened. He thought about the lawyers he kept on retainer, the ones who could file papers and have this settled in a week. He thought about the money sitting in his accounts, more than enough to buy this orchard 10 times over and still have change left. And he couldn't use any of it without blowing his cover. "There has to be a way," he said. "There isn't. I've looked. I've spent years looking." She turned to face him, and her expression was calm but final. "This is just how it is, Evan. Some things don't get fixed. You just learn to live with them." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she deserved better, but the words felt hollow coming from him. What right did he have to talk about fairness when he'd built his whole life on taking advantage of people in exactly the position she was in? So he drank his coffee and said nothing, and the silence between them felt heavier than before. After a while, Clara went back to work, and Evan sat there alone at the table, staring at his rough hands and wondering how many other people he'd crushed without even noticing. The thought made him sick. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm. Up before dawn, work until dusk, collapse into bed, and do it again. The snow kept falling, not heavy, but persistent, and the orchard took on a stillness that made every sound sharper. The crunch of boots on frozen ground, the crack of branches under the weight of ice, Claire's voice cutting through the cold, always steady, always certain. Evan stopped counting days. Time felt different here, measured not in calendar pages, but in tasks completed, in fences mended and wood chopped and animals fed. He learned the orchard the way you'd learn a language, through repetition and failure and small victories. He learned which trees were the oldest, the ones Clara's grandfather had planted. He learned which pump was temperamental and needed coaxing every morning. He learned that Clara took her coffee black, that she hated waste, that she could fix almost anything with wire and stubbornness. And he learned that she gave more than she had to everyone who asked. Her brother showed up twice more in December, both times needing money. Both times Clara gave it to him, even though Evan could see the calculations running behind her eyes, the way she was already figuring out what she'd have to cut to make up the difference. The second time after her brother had left, Evan found her in the barn, sitting on an overturned crate, her shoulders slumped. "You can't keep doing this," he said. "We've had this conversation." "Yeah, and you didn't listen the first time either." She looked up at him, and there was something fierce in her eyes. "He's my brother. He's using you." "Maybe, but he's still family, and family doesn't walk away just because things get hard." "Even when family's the one making things hard?" Clara stood, brushing dirt off her pants. "You don't have siblings, do you?" "No." "Then you don't get it. He's all I have. My mother's gone. My father barely speaks to me unless he's criticizing something. My brother might be a mess, but at least he shows up. At least he still sees me as a person and not just a pair of hands to work the trees." Evan wanted to tell her that her brother didn't see her as a person either, just as an open wallet, but he bit his tongue. This wasn't his family. This wasn't his place, except it was starting to feel like it was. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right. I don't get it." She nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Just trust me. I know what I'm doing." But she didn't. Evan could see it in the way her hand shook when she counted what was left in the cash box, in the way she stared at the ledger, like the numbers might rearrange themselves into something better if she looked long enough. She was drowning, and she was too proud to admit it. That night, lying in his rented room above the boarding house, Evan stared at the ceiling and thought about all the money sitting in his name. He could solve this. One wire transfer, one anonymous donation, and Clara would never have to worry about her brother or her father or whether the pump would last another season. But that would raise questions. Where did the money come from? Who sent it? Why? And once those questions started, the whole house of cards would collapse. So he did nothing and hated himself for it. January came in cold and mean, the kind of cold that made the air hurt to breathe, that turned the ground so hard you couldn't drive a fence post without swearing. Clara pushed through it like she pushed through everything else, but Evan could see the cracks forming. She was tired. More than tired, worn down to the bone. She moved slower, made small mistakes she'd never made before. Forgot to latch the barn door one night and had to chase down 2 goats in the freezing dark. Burned dinner because she dozed off waiting for the stove to heat. "You need to rest," Evan told her one morning when he found her asleep in the barn, slumped against a hay bale. She jerked awake, disoriented. "What time is it?" "Early, but not early enough that you should be sleeping out here." "I wasn't sleeping. I was just—" She stopped, rubbed her face. I sat down for a minute. "Clara." "I'm fine." "You're not fine, you're exhausted." "I'm always exhausted. That's not new." She stood, swaying slightly, and Evan reached out to steady her. His hand closed around her arm, and she didn't pull away. "When's the last time you slept a full night?" he asked. "I don't remember." "That's my point." She met his eyes, and for a moment he thought she might actually listen, but then she stepped back, breaking the contact, and shook her head. "I can't rest. Not yet. There's too much to do." "Then let me do it." "Evan, I'm serious. You tell me what needs doing, and I'll do it, but you need to sleep, actual sleep, in an actual bed." She looked at him like he'd suggested something impossible. "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. You've been carrying this place alone for years. Let someone help, just for one day." The fight went out of her all at once. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked so small in that moment that it hurt to see. "Okay," she said quietly. "One day." She made it to noon before she came back out, moving like a ghost, unable to stay away. Evan didn't comment, just handed her a pair of gloves and let her work beside him, and tried not to think about how wrong it was that she felt guilty for resting. That evening, they sat on the porch despite the cold, sharing a bottle of something her grandfather had made decades ago. It tasted like gasoline and regret, but it warmed the blood. "Can I tell you something?" Clara said after a long silence. "Anything." "I'm scared." The words came out quiet, almost lost in the wind. "I'm scared that one day I'm going to wake up and this place will be gone, sold out from under me. Or I'll just be too tired to keep going. And then what? What do I have if I don't have this?" Evan wanted to tell her she'd have more than she realized, that she was worth more than the work she did, more than the orchard, more than her family's failures. But he didn't know how to say it without sounding like he was pitying her, and she'd hate that worse than anything. "You'll have this," he said instead, gesturing at the trees. "Even if the paperwork says otherwise. You'll always have this because you're the one who kept it alive. No one can take that from you." She looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. "You're a strange man, Evan Cole." "How so?" "You show up out of nowhere. You work yourself half to death for almost no pay. You say things that sound like they come from someone who's lived 3 lifetimes. She took another drink. "Sometimes I think you're running from something. Sometimes I think you're looking for something. I can't figure out which." "Maybe both. What are you looking for?" The question was so direct it caught him off guard. He thought about lying, deflecting, changing the subject. But sitting there in the cold with this woman who'd let him into her life despite every reason not to, the truth felt like the only option. "I'm looking for proof that I'm worth something without everything I used to think made me matter," he said. "And I think I'm finding it. Here, with you." Clara went very still. The bottle hung forgotten in her hand. "Evan, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know. You asked what I was looking for. That's it. That's the answer." She set the bottle down carefully, like it might break. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You already are. Worth something, I mean. You don't need proof of that." "I did. I needed to know someone could see me without everything else. And do they? Do I? He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same question reflected back. Not about him, about her. Whether anyone could see her as more than just the girl who worked herself to dust for people who didn't deserve it. Yeah, he said. You do. The space between them felt charged, dangerous. Clara stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. I should go inside. It's late. Clara. Good night, Evan. She went inside before he could say anything else, and Evan sat there alone on the porch, the cold seeping into his bones, wondering if he just ruined everything or started something he didn't know how to finish. The next morning, Clara was back to normal, or pretending to be. She didn't mention their conversation, and Evan didn't push. They worked side by side like always, the rhythm familiar now, comfortable despite the tension underneath. But something had changed. He caught her looking at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, and he knew she caught him doing the same. A week later, her father showed up with a man Evan had never seen before. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of person who looked like he'd never done manual labor in his life. They stood in the yard talking while Clara was in the barn, and Evan couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. Her father was selling something, or someone. When they left, Evan found Clara's father alone by the fence. Who was that? Evan asked, keeping his voice neutral. The older man looked at him like he was noticing an insect. None of your concern. If it's about the orchard, it is my concern. I work here. You're hired help, don't forget that. He started to walk away, then stopped. But since you're so curious, that was Marcus Brennan, owns the mill 2 towns over. Decent man, respectable. Something cold settled in Evan's stomach. What's he doing here? Came to discuss a proposal. Her father smiled, and it was the ugliest expression Evan had ever seen. Might be Clara's finally going to be useful for something. He walked away before Evan could respond, and it was probably for the best because Evan wasn't sure he could have kept himself from doing something stupid. He found Clara in the barn, mucking stalls with a violence that suggested she already knew. You heard, he said. I heard. She drove the shovel into the hay with enough force to bury it. My father's trying to marry me off to Marcus Brennan, the mill owner. The mill owner who's 43, widowed twice, and looking for someone to run his house and raise his kids. She laughed, bitter. He came by last week too, looked at the orchard like he was appraising livestock, asked my father if I knew how to cook. What did you say? I didn't say anything. I wasn't invited to the conversation. It was between my father and Marcus. You know, the 2 men deciding my future. Evan felt fury building in his chest, the kind that made his vision narrow. You don't have to do this. Don't I? She yanked the shovel free, turned to face him. What exactly are my options, Evan? Stay here and work myself to death on land I don't legally own? Wait for my father to sell it anyway and leave me with nothing? At least if I marry Marcus, I'll have a roof over my head. You'd be miserable. I'm already miserable. The words came out sharp, cutting. At least this way, I'd be miserable in a warm house with food on the table and no one yelling at me for being worthless. You're not worthless. Tell that to my father. Tell that to everyone in town who's watched me kill myself for this place and still treats me like I'm nothing. She threw the shovel down. You don't get it. You're a man. You can go anywhere, do anything. I'm a woman who's nearly 30 with no husband and no prospects and a father who sees me as a burden. Marcus Brennan might not love me, but at least he's offering something. He's offering to use you, just like your father uses you, just like your brother uses you. And what are you offering? The question came out like a challenge. You've been here 3 months. You work hard, I'll give you that. But you're still just passing through. You'll leave eventually, go back to wherever you came from, and I'll still be here, alone. So don't stand there and tell me what I should or shouldn't do when you don't have to live with the consequences. The words hit like a physical blow. Because she was right. He could leave. He had a whole life waiting for him, a name that carried weight, resources that could solve every problem she faced. And he couldn't tell her any of it. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Clara's anger deflated as quickly as it had risen. She sagged against the stall door, suddenly looking exhausted again. No, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. She rubbed her eyes. I'm just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being strong. Tired of pretending I'm okay with all of this. Evan wanted to cross the space between them, wanted to pull her into his arms and promise her that everything would be fine. But he couldn't make that promise. Not as Evan Cole. Not without admitting who he really was. So he stayed where he was, helpless, while the woman he'd come to care about more than he'd thought possible stood there breaking apart. When? He asked finally. When what? When's your father expecting an answer about Brennan? End of the month. He's giving me 2 weeks to think it over. The bitterness was back in her voice. Like there's actually a choice. 2 weeks? 14 days. Evan's mind was already racing, calculating, trying to find an angle that didn't exist. He couldn't buy the orchard without revealing himself. Couldn't pay off her father's debts. Couldn't offer her any alternative that wouldn't raise questions he couldn't answer. Unless he told her the truth. The thought made his blood run cold. What would she say if she knew? That he was Landon Pierce, cattle baron, one of the richest men in the territory? That he'd lied to her every single day for 3 months? That everything between them was built on a deception? She'd hate him. She'd have every right to, but at least she'd be free. The idea took root, dangerous and tempting. He could tell her who he was. Could offer to buy the orchard, put it in her name legally. She'd be secure, safe, free from her father and Marcus Brennan and everyone else who'd ever used her, and she'd never forgive him. Evan? He looked up. Clara was watching him with concern. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Yeah, I'm fine. The lie came automatically now, smooth and easy. Just thinking. About what? About how to save you without losing you, he thought. About whether it's possible to do the right thing when the right thing means destroying everything. Nothing important, he said aloud. She didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. They finished the work in silence, and when Evan left that night, he felt the weight of the secret crushing him with every step. He had 2 weeks to figure out what to do. 2 weeks to decide between being honest and being wanted. 2 weeks before the woman he'd fallen for would be lost to him one way or another. The clock was ticking, and for the first time in his life, Landon Pierce had no idea how to win. The days bled together after that, each one heavier than the last. Evan went through the motions, fixing what broke, hauling what needed hauling, keeping his head down and his mouth shut. But his mind was elsewhere. Every conversation with Clara felt like walking on ice, one wrong word away from cracking through. She didn't bring up Marcus Brennan again, but the man's presence hung over the orchard like smoke. Evan saw it in the way Claire's jaw tightened whenever her father visited, in the way she'd pause sometimes mid-task and just stare at nothing, her hands gone still. A week passed, then 10 days. Evan had made no decision, or rather, he'd made a dozen decisions and unmade them all just as quickly. Tell her the truth, don't tell her. Offer to buy the orchard anonymously. Confess everything and face the consequences. Walk away before he made things worse. Every option felt wrong. On the 11th day, Clara found him in the barn before dawn, sitting on a hay bale with his head in his hands. "You're here early," she said. He looked up. She was backlit by the lantern she carried, her face in shadow, but he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Me neither." She set the lantern down, sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You've been different lately." "Have I?" "Quieter. Like you're working something out in your head." She glanced at him. "Want to talk about it?" More than anything, he thought, and less than anything. "It's nothing," he said. "Evan?" The way she said his name, his fake name, made something twist in his chest. She thought she knew him. She'd let him in, trusted him with pieces of herself she probably hadn't shared with anyone. And the whole time he'd been lying. "What if I told you I'm not who you think I am?" The words came out before he could stop them. Clara went still. "What does that mean?" He should have backtracked, should have laughed it off, made a joke, changed the subject. Instead, he said, "It means I came here under false pretenses. That everything you think you know about me is built on something that isn't real." The silence that followed was suffocating. "Are you married?" Clara asked finally, her voice carefully neutral. "No." "Running from the law?" "No." "Then what?" She turned to face him fully. "What are you talking about?" This was it. The moment he'd been circling for months. He could tell her everything right now, who he was, why he'd come, what he could offer her. He could solve all her problems with a single conversation and lose her completely. I'm talking about the fact that I'm not the man you think I am, he said quietly. That I've been keeping things from you, important things. Like what? Like... He stopped, looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just exhaustion, but something else. Fear. She was afraid of what he was about to say, afraid it would confirm something she'd already suspected. He couldn't do it, couldn't watch that fear turn into betrayal. Like the fact that I care about you more than I should, he said instead, and I don't know what to do with that. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Claire's expression shifted, going soft in a way he'd never seen before. Evan, I know you've got Brennan to think about, and your father's pressure, and 100 other things that matter more than what I feel. But I needed you to know. Before... He stopped. I just needed you to know. She reached out, her hand hovering for a moment before settling on his. Her palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cold. You're an idiot, she said, but there was no heat in it. Yeah. I have feelings for you, too. I've had them for a while now. She said it simply, like it was a fact she'd accepted. But feelings don't change reality. In 2 days, my father's going to ask me about Brennan, and I'm going to have to give him an answer. What if you said no? Then I lose the orchard. He'll sell it, and I'll have nothing. You'd have your freedom. Clara laughed, bitter and sharp. Freedom to do what? Starve? Live on the street? I'm good at growing apples, Evan. That's it. That's all I know. Without this place, I'm nothing. That's not true. Isn't it? She pulled her hand back. You can say no to things because you've got options. I don't. This is it for me. The orchard or Brennan. Those are my choices. There's a third option. What? Run away with you? She shook her head. You're a good man, Evan, but you're a drifter with nothing but the clothes on your back. I can't build a life on that. The words stung because they were accurate. Evan Cole had nothing. Landon Pierce had everything. And the gap between them felt insurmountable. Then marry me, he said. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and reckless. Clara stared at him like he'd lost his mind. What? Marry me. We'll figure the rest out, but at least you won't be stuck with Brennan. Evan, that's... She stood abruptly, putting distance between them. That's insane. We barely know each other. We've worked side by side for 3 months. I know you take your coffee black. I know you hate waste. I know you're stronger than anyone I've ever met, and you deserve better than what you've been given. That's not the same as knowing someone well enough to marry them. Why not? Plenty of people marry for less. And are they happy? Clara wrapped her arms around herself. This is a terrible idea. You know that, right? This is the kind of thing desperate people do when they've run out of options. Then I guess we're both desperate. She looked at him, and he could see her mind working, weighing options, calculating odds. This was how she approached everything, practical, methodical, accepting only what she could afford to risk. If I said yes, she said slowly, it wouldn't be a real marriage, not at first. It would be an arrangement, a way to keep my father from forcing me into something worse. I understand. And you'd be okay with that? Being married in name only? No. He wanted to tell her no, that he wanted all of it, the real thing, the life together, everything. But he couldn't ask for that, not when she was already giving more than she should. If that's what you need, he said. Clara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I need to think about it. Okay? Don't tell anyone, not yet. Let me think. She left the barn without another word, and Evan sat there in the growing light, wondering if he'd just made the best decision of his life or the worst mistake. The next day, Clara avoided him. Not obviously. She still worked, still gave instructions, still moved through the orchard with the same steady efficiency. But there was a distance now that hadn't been there before. She didn't meet his eyes. Didn't speak unless she had to. Evan gave her space, threw himself into work, repairing the fence on the north side that had been leaning for weeks, keeping his hands busy so his mind wouldn't spiral. He didn't know what he'd do if she said no. Go back to his old life, probably. Resume being Landon Pierce, cattle baron, the man who'd walked away from everything to answer a question he now wished he'd never asked. But he knew what would happen if she said yes. The lie would grow. Every day they were married would be another day of deception, another layer between who he really was and who she thought he was. Eventually, the truth would come out. It always did. And when it did, she'd hate him. Maybe that was what he deserved. That evening, as the sun was setting and the cold was settling in hard, Clara found him by the well. "I'll do it," she said without preamble. Evan straightened, his pulse suddenly loud in his ears. "You will? But we need rules, boundaries." She looked at him directly now, her expression serious. "This is a business arrangement. We're doing this so I can keep the orchard and you can, whatever it is you're getting out of this. But it's not love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You understand?" "I understand." "We sleep in separate rooms. We keep our finances separate. And if either of us wants out, we can walk away. No questions, no blame." "Agreed. And you have to promise me something." "Anything." Clara took a step closer. "Promise me you won't lie to me. Whatever else happens, whatever this becomes, I need to know I can trust you. Can you promise me that?" The question landed like a knife between his ribs. Evan felt the full weight of every deception he'd built, every half-truth and careful omission. He should tell her now, right now, before this went any further. "I promise," he heard himself say. And there it was, the worst lie of all. Clara nodded, satisfied. "Then we'll do it. Tomorrow, before my father comes by. We'll go to the courthouse, make it legal, and by the time he shows up demanding an answer about Brennan, it'll be too late." "Tomorrow," Evan repeated. "Tomorrow." She turned to go, then paused. "And Evan? Thank you. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you came here looking for work." She walked away before he could respond, and Evan stood there by the well as night fell around him, wondering how something that should have felt like a victory could taste so much like ash. They married the next morning in a courthouse that smelled like old paper and floor wax. The clerk was half asleep, the witness was someone pulled in from the hallway, and the whole thing took maybe 10 minutes. Clara signed her name in careful script. Evan signed Evan Cole and felt like a fraud. When it was done, they walked out into the cold winter air as husband and wife, and it felt nothing like Evan had imagined. Clara was quiet on the ride back to the orchard. She sat beside him in the wagon, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. "You okay?" Evan asked. "I just got married to a man I've known for 3 months," she said. "I don't think okay covers it." "Regrets?" She was quiet for a moment. "Ask me again in a year." They arrived at the orchard to find Clara's father waiting in the yard, Marcus Brennan standing beside him. Both men turned as the wagon approached, and Evan felt Clara go rigid next to him. "Where the hell have you been?" her father demanded. Clara climbed down from the wagon, steady despite everything. "The courthouse." "The courthouse? What for?" "To get married." The words fell like stones. Her father's face went from confused to furious in the space of a heartbeat. "You what?" "I got married. To Evan." She gestured at him, and Evan stepped forward, standing beside her. "We were married this morning. It's legal and binding." Marcus Brennan looked like he'd been slapped. "This is some kind of joke." "It's not a joke," Clara said calmly. "I'm married now, which means your proposal, generous as it was, is no longer relevant." Her father found his voice. "You stupid girl. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes. I made a choice. My choice. For the first time in my life." "You made a mistake is what you did. Married to some drifter with nothing to his name. His name is Evan Cole, and he's my husband." Clara's voice was steel. "Which means he has as much say about this orchard as I do. So unless you want to deal with both of us, I suggest you rethink how you talk to me." Evan had never heard her speak like that. Direct, unflinching, like she'd finally found a line she was willing to defend. Her father looked between them, his face purple with rage. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Clara said quietly. Marcus Brennan cleared his throat. "I think we should go." He looked at Clara, something almost like respect in his eyes. "Congratulations on your marriage." He walked away, and after a moment of sputtering rage, Clara's father followed. They watched as the two men climbed into their wagon and drove off, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust and anger. When they were gone, Clara let out a breath she'd been holding. That was... She stopped, laughed. A real laugh, startled and genuine. That felt good. Evan found himself smiling. You were incredible. I was terrified. Didn't show. She looked at him, and something in her expression softened. Thank you. For standing there, for backing me up. I don't think I could have done that alone. You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. They stood there in the yard, the winter sun weak but present, and for the first time in months, Evan felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd done something right. It didn't last. That night, Clara made dinner, simple but good, the kind of meal that came from knowing how to make a little go a long way. They ate in silence, the weight of the day settling around them. Afterward, Clara showed him to the spare room. It was small, barely big enough for the bed and a chest of drawers, but it was clean and the blankets looked warm. This is yours, she said. For now. For now, Evan repeated. She lingered in the doorway. This is strange, isn't it? Yeah. We're married, but we're not. We're partners, but we don't really know each other. She shook her head. I don't know what we're doing. Making it up as we go, I guess. That's not very reassuring. No, Evan agreed, but it's honest. Clara smiled slightly. Good night, Evan. Good night, Clara. She closed the door, and Evan sat on the bed, staring at the walls of the room that was his and wasn't, in a house he now shared with a woman who was his wife, but not really, living a life built entirely on a lie. He should have felt guilty. He did feel guilty. But underneath that was something else, a quiet, stubborn hope that maybe this could work, that maybe he could make this right somehow. The hope lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning after the wedding, Evan was in town picking up supplies when he ran into Thomas Garrett, his foreman, the man who thought Evan was 2 states away looking at property. They locked eyes across the general store, and Evan watched recognition bloom on Thomas's face. Mr. Pierce? The name fell like a gunshot in the quiet store. Heads turned. People stopped talking. Evan felt everything crumble. Thomas, he said quietly. Not here. But the damage was done. The clerk behind the counter had heard. The woman browsing fabric had heard. The man buying ammunition had heard. By noon, everyone in Bridger's Hollow would know that Evan Cole wasn't Evan Cole at all. He was Landon Pierce, the cattle baron who owned half the territory and had apparently been playing farmhand for the last 3 months. Evan walked out of the store without the supplies, his mind racing. He had to get back to the orchard, had to tell Clara before someone else did, had to explain, had to make her understand. But when he arrived, Clara was already standing in the yard, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Tell me it's not true, she said. Evan's stomach dropped. Clara, tell me you're not Landon Pierce. Tell me you didn't spend 3 months lying to my face. Her voice was shaking. Tell me this whole thing wasn't some kind of game. It wasn't a game. Then what was it? I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why a man who owns more land than my father could dream of showed up at my orchard pretending to be a drifter? Can you explain why you worked for almost nothing when you could buy this entire place with pocket change? Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Can you explain why you married me knowing I had no idea who you really were? I wanted to know if someone could see me for who I am, not what I own, Evan said desperately. I wanted to know if I was worth something without the name, without the power. So you used me. You turned my life into your personal experiment. No, that's not... It started that way maybe, but it changed. You changed it. I fell for you, Clara, the real you, and I didn't know how to tell you without losing, but you never had me to lose. The words came out sharp, final. You had a woman who thought she was marrying a decent man with nothing. What I got was a liar who had everything and pretended to be nothing. I'm still the same person. No, you're not. The person I knew, Evan, he doesn't exist. He never did. She took a shaky breath. I want you to leave. Clara, please, leave, now, before I say something I can't take back. Evan stood there, desperate for the words that would fix this, that would make her understand. But looking at her face, the betrayal written in every line, he knew there was nothing he could say. He'd lost her the moment he'd lied. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "So am I." She turned and walked into the house, and Evan heard the door lock behind her. He stood there in the yard of the orchard he'd come to love, surrounded by trees he'd helped tend, and felt the full weight of what he'd destroyed. He'd gotten his answer. Someone could love him without his name. Clara had. She'd loved Evan Cole, the man who worked until his hands bled, who listened when she spoke, who stood beside her when she needed someone. She'd never even met Landon Pierce, and now she never would. Evan walked to the barn, gathered the few possessions he'd brought, and left. He didn't look back. Couldn't. By the time he reached town, the sun was setting. He checked into the boarding house, same room he'd rented when he first arrived, and sat on the bed staring at nothing. His whole plan had been to prove he was worth something without his wealth and status. He'd succeeded. Clara had valued him, respected him, maybe even loved him. And then he'd thrown it all away by being exactly what he'd claimed he wasn't, a man who took what he wanted without counting the cost. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. He stayed in that room for 2 days, trying to figure out what came next. Go back to his old life? Pretend the last 3 months hadn't happened? Resume being Landon Pierce, cattle baron, the man who'd learned nothing and changed even less? The thought made him sick. On the 3rd day, there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Marcus Brennan standing in the hallway. "Mr. Pierce," Brennan said, "we need to talk." Landon stared at the man in his doorway, trying to make sense of his presence. Marcus Brennan looked different than he had a week ago, less polished, more uncertain, like he'd come here against his better judgment. "How did you find me?" Landon asked. "Small town, people talk." Brennan gestured at the hallway. "Can I come in?" Landon stepped aside, and Brennan entered the cramped room, taking in the sparse furniture and single window with a glance. He didn't sit, just stood there with his hat in his hands. "I'll get to the point," Brennan said. "Clara's father came to see me yesterday, told me about your situation, asked if I was still interested in marrying his daughter, now that her current marriage was based on fraud." Landon's jaw tightened. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him no." Brennan met his eyes. "I told him I wasn't interested in a woman who'd been forced into anything, legal complications or not." "Then why are you here?" "Because I wanted you to know something." Brennan turned his hat in his hands. "When Clara turned me down at the orchard that day, I was angry, humiliated. I'd come there expecting one thing and got something completely different. But watching her stand up to her father, watching the way she looked at you, even if you were lying about who you were, I realized something." "What's that?" "She was never going to marry me. Not really. Even if you hadn't shown up, even if she'd said yes to save the orchard, I would have gotten a wife who was just going through the motions. A woman doing what she had to do to survive." He looked at Landon directly. "I don't want that. I buried 2 wives already. I'm not interested in a 3rd who'd rather be anywhere else." Landon didn't know what to say to that. "The thing is," Brennan continued, "I saw how she looked at you, before she knew. And I saw how you looked at her. That wasn't fake. Whatever else you lied about, that part was real. Doesn't matter now. She wants nothing to do with me. Maybe, maybe not." Brennan put his hat back on. "But if there's even a chance you actually care about her, you should fight for it. Not as Landon Pierce with all his money and land, as the man who worked beside her for 3 months. That's who she fell for. That's who you need to be." He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "And for what it's worth, I think you're a damn fool. But I also think Clara deserves someone who'd give up everything just to be near her. You already did that once. Question is whether you've got it in you to do it again." Brennan left, and Landon stood there in the empty room, his words echoing in the silence. The next morning, Landon made a decision. He sent a telegram to his foreman with clear instructions about the ranch, then went to see the only lawyer in Bridger's Hollow. The man's office was above the barber shop, cramped and dusty, but his eyes were sharp. "Mr. Pierce," the lawyer said, standing when Landon entered. "I heard you were in town. What can I do for you?" "I need you to draw up papers transferring ownership of the Whitmore orchard to Clara Whitmore. Legally and completely." The lawyer blinked. "The orchard's currently owned by her father, Samuel Whitmore. You can't transfer property you don't own. Then I need you to draw up papers for me to purchase it from Samuel, followed immediately by papers transferring it to Clara. I'll pay whatever he's asking, plus 20%. That's substantial. You sure about this? Completely sure, and I need it done today. The lawyer whistled low. That's going to cost you. I don't care what it costs. Can you do it? I can do it, but Mr. Whitmore will need to agree to sell. He will. Trust me. Landon knew men like Samuel Whitmore. They always had a price, and it was always less than they were worth. It took 3 hours and a conversation Landon would have paid to avoid, but by mid-afternoon the papers were signed. Samuel Whitmore walked away with more money than the orchard was worth, a smug expression on his face, and absolutely no idea what his daughter was about to inherit. The second set of papers, transferring ownership from Landon to Clara, sat on the lawyer's desk, witnessed and notarized. You want me to file these now? The lawyer asked. No, I'll deliver them myself. Mr. Pierce, if you're trying to use this to... I'm not trying to use it for anything. She deserves to own what she's been killing herself to maintain. That's all. The lawyer looked skeptical, but handed over the papers. Landon folded them carefully, tucked them inside his coat, and walked out into the cold afternoon air. He stood outside the lawyer's office for a long time, trying to find the courage to do what came next. Going to the orchard meant facing Clara, meant seeing the anger and betrayal in her eyes again, meant accepting that she might throw him out before he got 10 words in. But Brennan was right. If there was even a chance, he had to take it. He borrowed a horse from the livery and rode out to the orchard as the sun was starting to sink. The trees looked skeletal in the winter light, branches bare against the gray sky. Smoke rose from the chimney of the small house, and Landon felt something clench in his chest. He'd missed this place, missed the work, the quiet, the sense of purpose that came from fixing things with his hands. Missed Clara most of all. He dismounted in the yard and stood there for a moment, gathering himself. Then he walked to the door and knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Clara, I know you're in there. I just want to talk. Still nothing. Please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. The door opened so suddenly it startled him. Clara stood in the doorway, her expression hard. I gave you a chance to talk 3 days ago. You left. You told me to leave. And now I'm telling you again, get off my property. It is your property. That's what I came to tell you. Landon pulled the papers from his coat, held them out. The orchard's yours, legally. I bought it from your father and transferred the deed to your name. It's done. Clara stared at the papers like they might bite her. What are you talking about? Your father sold me the orchard this afternoon. I paid him what he asked, then immediately signed it over to you. You own it now, free and clear, no strings, no conditions. It's yours. She didn't take the papers. Why would you do that? Because you deserve to own what you've been working yourself to death for. Because your father had no right to hold it over your head. Because... He stopped. Because you earned this 1,000 times over, and I have the means to make it happen. So this is guilt. You're trying to buy your way back into No, this isn't about me. This is about you finally having what should have been yours all along. He set the papers on the porch railing between them. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance or even for you to speak to me again after today. I just wanted you to have this. Clara looked at the papers, then at him. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's what's right. What's right would have been not lying to me in the first place. You're absolutely correct, and I can't change that. I can't take back the lie or make it hurt less. But I can do this. I can make sure you never have to worry about your father selling this place out from under you or forcing you into a marriage you don't want. He took a step back. The papers are there. You can burn them if you want, but they're legal. The orchard is yours either way. He turned to go, and Clara's voice stopped him. Wait. He looked back. She'd picked up the papers, was scanning them with the same careful attention she gave everything. This is real, she said quietly. You actually did this. Yes. Why? I told you why. No, you told me what you did. I'm asking why. Why you care. Why you came here in the first place. Why you worked 3 months for almost nothing when you could have been doing anything else. She looked up at him. I want the truth, Landon, not the version you think I want to hear, the actual truth. Landon felt something shift in his chest. She'd used his real name, not Evan. Landon. The truth is, I was hollow, he said. I had everything a man's supposed to want: land, money, respect, and none of it meant anything. I'd look around at my life and feel nothing, just this emptiness that wouldn't go away no matter what I acquired or accomplished. He met her eyes. Then I saw you at the market, saw the way your father humiliated you, and the way you just took it and kept going. And I thought, she's stronger than anyone I've ever met. What would it be like to be near someone like that? Someone real. So you lied your way into my life. Yes, I did. And it was wrong. And I knew it was wrong even while I was doing it. But I told myself I'd leave before it mattered, before anyone got hurt. He laughed, bitter. Turns out I'm not as smart as I thought. What changed? You did. Every day I spent here, every conversation, every moment of watching you carry more than anyone should have to carry. I stopped thinking about my experiment and started thinking about you. What you needed, what you deserved, how I could make your life even a little bit easier. He paused. And somewhere in there, I fell in love with you. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Clara's hands tightened on the papers. You can't just say things like that. Why not? It's true. Because it's not fair. You lied to me, Landon. You made me trust you, made me care about you, made me believe I knew you, and the whole time you were playing a part. At first, maybe, but not by the end. By the end, I was more myself with you than I'd been in years. The work, the conversations, the life we were building. That was real. The only lie was my name. Your name and your entire history, and the fact that you could have solved every problem I had with a single conversation, but chose not to. Clara's voice cracked. Do you have any idea how that feels? To find out the person you married could have helped you all along, but watched you struggle instead? I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Clara. Landon took a careful step closer. But I couldn't help you as Landon Pierce. If I'd shown up as myself, you would have seen the money and the status and nothing else. You never would have let me close enough to actually know you, and I needed to know you, the real you, not the version you show people who might use it against you. So you used it against me anyway. The accusation hit like a slap. That's not what I was doing. Wasn't it? You wanted to know if someone could love you without your wealth, so you took away my ability to choose. You made the decision for me about what information I got to have. That's not love, Landon. That's control. She was right. The realization settled over him like cold water. He'd been so focused on his own question, his own needs, that he'd never stopped to consider what he was taking from her by hiding the truth. You're right, he said quietly. I did control the situation. I told myself it was necessary, that I was protecting something important, but really I was just protecting myself. From rejection, from finding out that maybe I'm not worth loving without the trappings. He looked at her fully. I'm sorry. You deserve better than that. You deserved honesty from the beginning, and I didn't give it to you because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of this. Of you looking at me the way you're looking at me right now and realizing I'm not worth the trouble. Clara was quiet for a long moment. You really believe that, don't you? That without your name and your money, you're nothing. I don't know what I believe anymore. Then let me tell you something. She set the papers down, came closer. The man I fell for was the one who showed up every day before dawn, who fixed fences even when it took him 3 times longer than it should have because he was learning as he went, who stood up to my father in the barn even though it wasn't his place, who sat with me on cold nights and made me feel less alone. Her eyes were bright. That man wasn't Landon Pierce, he was Evan Cole. And Evan Cole was a good man. Flawed, stubborn, kind of an idiot sometimes, but good. Evan Cole doesn't exist. No, but the person you were when you thought you were him did. That's who I want to know, not the cattle baron with all the answers. The man who's still figuring it out. She paused. Can you be that person without the disguise? Landon didn't know how to answer that. The question struck at the heart of everything, whether he could be vulnerable and uncertain and real without the safety of a false identity. I don't know, he admitted. I've been Landon Pierce my whole life. I've built walls so high, I don't remember what's underneath them anymore. Then maybe it's time to find out. And if there's nothing there worth finding, then I guess we'll both be disappointed. Clara crossed her arms. But I think there is. I think the man who worked beside me for 3 months is still in there somewhere. I just need to know if he's willing to show up without the lies. Landon felt something crack open in his chest, painful and necessary. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm still angry. I'm saying I don't trust you yet. I'm saying this is going to take time and effort, and there's no guarantee it'll work. She met his eyes. But I'm also saying I'm willing to try if you are, not as Evan and Clara, as Landon and Clara. Starting from scratch, with the truth this time. Hope flickered in Landon's chest, fragile and uncertain. You mean that? I mean it, but I have conditions. Anything. First, you work here, not as a favor to me, not as penance, but because the orchard needs the help and you're good at it. You pull your weight the same as before. Done. Second, no more secrets. I don't care if you think I'll be upset, or if it's embarrassing, or if it's something you'd rather not talk about. If I ask you a question, you answer honestly, every time. I can do that. Third, she paused. Third, we're still married, but we're starting over. Separate rooms, no assumptions, getting to know each other the right way. If something develops, fine. If it doesn't, we'll figure out an annulment. But I'm not building a marriage on a foundation of lies. Understood. And Clara studied him, and Landon felt like she could see straight through him. Why did you really come back? And don't say it was just to give me the papers. You could have had the lawyer do that. I came back because Brennan told me I was a fool if I didn't fight for you, and because I realized that losing you was worse than any humiliation or rejection. He took a breath. And because even if you never forgive me, I needed you to know that what I felt for you was real. That might be the only true thing in this whole mess, but it's true. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Come inside. It's freezing out here, and we've got a lot to talk about." She turned and went into the house, leaving the door open behind her. Landon stood there for a heartbeat, hardly daring to believe this was happening. Then he followed her inside, into the warmth and the light, and the uncertain future they were about to try to build. They sat at the kitchen table, coffee between them, and Clara laid out exactly what she expected. No more half-truths. No more omissions. If they were going to make this work, everything had to be on the table. Landon told her about his ranch, the scope of it, what he actually owned. He told her about his mother, a formidable woman who'd never approved of anyone he'd brought home because no one met her impossible standards. He told her about the loneliness that had driven him to walk away from everything, the question that had haunted him, the moment in the market when he'd first seen her. Clara listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When he was done, she said, "Your mother sounds difficult." That's putting it mildly. Does she know you're here? No, as far as she knows, I'm still out east looking at property. You'll have to tell her eventually. I know. Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. What happens when she finds out you married the orchard girl? The one with no money, no status, no family worth mentioning? She'll hate it. She'll probably hate you by extension, at least at first. Landon met Clara's eyes. But that's her problem, not yours. I'm not asking you to win her approval. Good. Because I have no interest in trying. Clara took a sip of coffee. My turn. You want to know the truth about me? Here it is. I'm tired. I've been tired my whole life. Tired of working, tired of fighting, tired of being invisible unless someone needs something from me. When you showed up as Evan, for the first time in years, someone saw me as a person. Not as labor, not as a burden, just as me. She looked down. That's why it hurt so much when I found out the truth, because I thought I'd finally found someone who understood, and it turned out to be an illusion. It wasn't an illusion. I did see you. I do see you. As what? A project? A challenge? The woman who could prove your theory about love and worth? As the strongest person I've ever met. As someone who deserved better than what she'd been given. He stopped. As the person I wanted to be worthy of. Clara's eyes softened slightly. You can't make me responsible for your self-worth, Landon. That's not fair to either of us. I know, but you made me want to be better. That's different. She didn't respond to that, just stood and walked to the window, staring out at the orchard in the fading light. I want to believe you, she said quietly. I want to believe this can work, but I need time. And I need to see that you mean it, not just with words, but with actions. Then that's what I'll do, however long it takes. She turned to face him. There's something else you should know. When word got out about who you really are, people started treating me differently. The women at the market who used to ignore me suddenly want to be my friend. The shopkeeper who used to shortchange me is suddenly all smiles. Even my brother showed up asking if I could put in a good word with my rich husband. What did you tell him? I told him to go to hell. She smiled slightly. First time I've ever said that to him. It felt good. Landon found himself smiling back. Good. But it also made me realize something. If we do this, if we actually try to make this marriage work, people are going to have opinions. They're going to say I married you for money, that I'm a gold digger or a social climber or whatever else they want to believe. Let them talk. Their opinions don't matter. They matter to me. I've spent my whole life being talked about. The daughter who couldn't keep a man. The girl who works like a mule. The spinster with dirt under her nails. Claire's voice was steady but firm. I don't want to trade one set of whispers for another. Then we prove them wrong. We show them that this is real. How? By living our lives. By working the orchard together. By being honest with each other, even when it's hard. He paused. By building something that's ours, not mine or yours, but ours together. Clara studied him, and Landon held her gaze, letting her see everything, the hope, the fear, the desperate want to make this right. Finally, she nodded. Okay, we try. But Landon, if you lie to me again about anything, we're done. No second chances, no explanations, just done. You understand? I understand. Then welcome home. She said it simply, without fanfare, but the words hit Landon like a benediction. Home. He'd had houses, estates, properties across 3 territories, but he'd never had a home. Until now. The next few days were strange and careful. Landon moved back into the spare room and they settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and completely new. They worked side by side like before, but now the silence was weighted with everything unsaid, everything they were both trying to figure out. Clara was true to her word about the questions. She asked him everything, about his childhood, his business, his past relationships, his fears. And Landon answered honestly, even when it hurt, even when he wanted to deflect. In return, he learned things about Clara he'd never known. That she'd wanted to be a teacher when she was young but couldn't afford the schooling. That her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her to raise her brother while her father drank himself through his grief. That she loved reading but rarely had time for it. That she could play the fiddle but hadn't touched one in years. That she was terrified of horses because one had kicked her when she was a child. They were learning each other all over again, and it was harder this way. Messier, but also more real. One evening, a week after Landon had returned, they were in the barn when Clara said, "Tell me about the worst thing you've ever done." Landon paused in the middle of repairing a harness. What? You heard me. Worst thing. I want to know. He set down the leather, thinking. In business or in general? Either. Both. There was a man a few years back, Landon said slowly. Owned a small ranch adjacent to mine. Good land, decent water. I wanted to expand, made him an offer. He turned me down. He paused. So I bought up his debts from the bank, called them in all at once. He couldn't pay, lost everything. I bought the ranch for a fraction of what it was worth. Clara was quiet. Did you regret it? At the time? No. I told myself it was business. He'd had his chance to sell on fair terms. Landon looked at his hands. Now? Yeah. I regret it, because I know what it feels like to watch someone lose everything. And I know that man had a family, had worked that land his whole life. I took that from him because I could. What happened to him? Don't know. Never asked. Never cared enough to find out. He met her eyes. That's the worst part. Not what I did, but how little it mattered to me at the time. Clara nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. You're not disgusted? Oh, I'm disgusted. But I'd rather know who I'm dealing with than pretend you're something you're not. She went back to work. We've all done things we're not proud of. The question is whether we learn from them. And have I? Learned? I don't know yet. Ask me in a year. It became her standard answer to everything uncertain. Ask me in a year, like, She was giving them both time to prove what this could be. Landon found he didn't mind the wait. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in a hurry to get somewhere else. He was exactly where he wanted to be. 2 weeks after his return, Clara's father showed up. He stood in the yard looking smaller somehow, diminished. "I heard you're back," he said to Landon. "I'm back." "And the orchard?" "Is Clara's, legally. You already got your money." Samuel Whitmore looked at his daughter, and something ugly twisted in his expression. "So that's it? You get everything and I get nothing?" "You got paid more than this place is worth," Clara said evenly. "And you haven't set foot on this property to actually work in over a decade. What exactly do you think you're owed?" "Respect, gratitude. You're my daughter, and you're my father, but that doesn't give you the right to treat me like property." Clara's voice was calm, final. "The orchard is mine now. If you want to visit, you're welcome. If you want to help, even better. But if you're here to criticize or demand or try to take something else from me, you can leave." Her father stared at her like she was a stranger. Maybe she was. The Clara he'd known had never stood up to him, never pushed back. That Clara was gone. "You've changed," he said. "Yes, I have." He looked at Landon, something between anger and resignation in his eyes. "You did this. Turned her against her own family." "No," Landon said quietly. "You did that all on your own. I just gave her the option to stop accepting it." Samuel Whitmore left without another word, and Clara watched him go with an expression Landon couldn't quite read. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know. Part of me feels relieved. Part of me feels guilty." She turned to him. "Is that normal?" "I think so. He's still your father, even if he's not a good one." "Yeah?" She took a breath. "But he's not my responsibility anymore. That's the part I have to keep reminding myself. His choices aren't my burden to carry." Landon wanted to pull her close, wanted to comfort her, but they hadn't reached that point yet. So he just stood beside her, sharing the weight of the moment without trying to fix it. And somehow, that was enough. That evening, after her father had gone and the light had faded to gray, Clara sat on the porch steps while Landon chopped wood for the stove. The rhythmic thunk of the axe was the only sound for a long time, steady and familiar. "I keep waiting for it to feel different," Clara said finally. Landon paused mid-swing. "What do you mean?" "Owning this place. Having my name on the deed. I thought it would feel like freedom, like relief, but mostly it just feels like the same work with different paperwork." He set the axe down, came to sit beside her. Not too close. They still had boundaries, invisible lines neither of them crossed without permission. "What did you think it would feel like?" he asked. "I don't know. Lighter, maybe? Like a weight had been lifted." She pulled her shawl tighter against the cold. "But the weight's still there. The trees still need tending. The fences still need mending. My father's still bitter. My brother still thinks I owe him something." She looked at Landon. "The only thing that changed is I can't be forced off my own land anymore. And I guess that's something. It's more than something. It's everything." "Is it? Because right now it feels like I traded one kind of trapped for another." Landon was quiet for a moment. "You want to know what I think? That's why I'm asking. I think you've been carrying other people's weight for so long you don't know what it feels like to just carry your own. The orchard's yours now, but you're still acting like you have to justify owning it, like you have to prove you deserve it." Clara turned that over. "Maybe I do." "To who? Your father. He lost the right to your justification years ago. Your brother? He's never done a damn thing to earn it. Me?" Landon shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. Not gratitude, not explanations, nothing. This is yours because you worked for it. That's the only reason you need." She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the darkening orchard. "You're different than you were when you first came back." "How so?" "Less careful. You used to measure every word like you were negotiating a deal. Now you just say what you think." She glanced at him. "I like it better this way." "Yeah, well, turns out pretending takes a lot of energy. I'm tired of it." "Good. I'm tired of it too." Claire stood, brushed off her skirt. "Come on. I'll make dinner and you can tell me more uncomfortable truths about myself." "That's not what I was doing." "Wasn't it?" She smiled slightly. "But like I said, I prefer it." They went inside, and for the first time since Landon had returned, the silence between them felt easy. Spring came slowly that year, the cold reluctant to release its grip. But by late March, the first buds appeared on the apple trees, tight green promises of the season to come. Clara walked the rows every morning, checking for frost damage, planning the work ahead. Landon walked beside her, learning the rhythms of the orchard all over again. Not as Evan Cole, the drifter who knew nothing, as himself. As someone who was still figuring out who that was. They worked hard through April and into May, pruning and fertilizing and repairing winter damage. The physical labor felt good, honest. Landon had forgotten how much he actually enjoyed working with his hands, how satisfying it was to see tangible results at the end of a day. He'd been away from his ranch for almost 6 months now. His foreman sent weekly reports. Everything was running smoothly, the cattle were healthy, the books balanced. Landon read the updates and felt nothing. That life seemed distant, like something that had happened to someone else. One afternoon in mid-May, Clara found him sitting under one of the older trees, taking a rare break. "You look thoughtful," she said, "just thinking about how different this is from what I used to do." "Miss it?" "No, that's what I was thinking about. I don't miss it at all." He looked up at her. "I spent 20 years building that ranch into something people respected, and now I'm here, doing manual labor for no pay, and I'm happier than I've ever been. What does that say about me?" "That you were doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. Or maybe the right thing for the wrong reasons. I'm not sure which." Clara sat down beside him, closer than she would have a month ago. "What were you trying to prove with the ranch? That I mattered, that I was worth something, that my name meant something. And does it mean something?" Landon thought about that. "It means I'm good at acquiring things. Land, cattle, money. But none of that's the same as mattering. None of that's the same as being worth something to another person." "And you think you're worth something now?" "I think I'm starting to understand what worth actually means. It's not about what you own or what people call you. It's about whether you show up, whether you do the work, whether you're honest when it matters." He met her eyes. "You taught me that." Clara's expression softened. "I didn't teach you anything. You just finally stopped lying to yourself long enough to see it." "Maybe. But you created the space for it to happen." She didn't argue with that, just sat there beside him in the dappled shade, and Landon felt something settle in his chest. Not happiness, exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt like peace. That evening, after dinner, Clara handed him a book. "Here." Landon looked at the cover. Poetry. Whitman. "What's this for?" "You said you wanted to know me better. I love this book, have since I was 16. She shrugged. "Thought you might like to read it." He opened it carefully. The spine was cracked, the pages worn soft from repeated reading. In the margins, Clara had written notes to herself in careful script. Questions, observations, arguments with the poet. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. You might hate it." "I won't." "How do you know?" "Because you love it. That's enough." Clara looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she turned away quickly, busying herself with cleaning up. "Well, let me know what you think." Landon read the book that night, slowly, paying attention to the passages Clara had marked. And he began to understand her differently. The girl who'd wanted to be a teacher, who'd filled the margins of her books with thoughts she had no one to share with, who'd found beauty in words because the world around her offered so little. The next morning, he told her his favorite passage. She smiled, genuine and bright, and said, "Mine too." It felt like progress. By June, the orchard was thriving. The trees were heavy with young fruit. The irrigation system hummed along without complaint, and for the first time in years, Clara looked like she might actually turn a profit. She hired 2 workers for the harvest season, young men from town who needed the money and didn't ask too many questions about her marriage to Landon Pierce. They worked hard, showed up on time, and Clara paid them fairly. Landon saw the pride in her face when she handed over their first week's wages, and he understood what it meant. She was finally the boss of her own operation, not the unpaid labor for someone else's. One evening, after the workers had left and the sun was setting orange and heavy over the horizon, Clara said, "I want to ask you something." "Okay." "Your ranch, the one you've been away from for half a year, what happens to it if you stay here?" Landon had been expecting this question. "It keeps running. My foreman's capable. The operation's solid." But you're not there. No. Doesn't that bother you? It did at first. I kept thinking I should go back, check on things, make sure everything was running the way I wanted. He paused. But then I realized I didn't actually care how it ran as long as it didn't fall apart. I built that place to prove something, and once I proved it, there was nothing left. Clara was quiet, thinking. So what are you going to do with it? I don't know. Sell it, maybe. Or keep it running from a distance, or... He looked at her. Or I could fold it into something here, expand the orchard, build something that's actually ours, not just mine or yours. That's a big decision. Yeah. One we should make together, if we're actually doing this, being married, I mean, for real. Landon felt his heart kick hard against his ribs. Are we? Doing this for real? Clara met his eyes, and for the first time in months he saw something unguarded there. I don't know yet, but I'm starting to think we might be. It wasn't a declaration of love, it wasn't even a promise, but it was hope, and that was enough. In late June, a telegram came from Landon's mother. It was terse and direct, exactly like her. Heard you got married. Bring her home. I want to meet the woman who finally caught you. Landon showed Clara the telegram. She read it and laughed, sharp and disbelieving. She thinks I caught you, like you're a prize fish. She thinks everyone's trying to catch something. Money, status, connections. It's how she sees the world. And what does she think I caught? Everything I have, which, by her logic, means you're either very clever or very lucky. Clara handed the telegram back. Do we have to go? Eventually, yeah. She won't let it rest until she's made her judgment. Landon paused. But we don't have to go now. We can wait until you're ready. Will I ever be ready to meet a woman who thinks I'm a gold digger? Probably not. But if it helps, she thinks that about everyone. Strangely, that does help. Clara considered. What if she hates me? She probably will. At least at first. You're very reassuring, you know that? I'm being honest. You said no more lies, no more softening the truth. So here it is. My mother's difficult, judgmental, and she's never approved of anyone I've brought home because no one's good enough in her eyes. He looked at Clara steadily. But I don't care what she thinks. I stopped caring about her approval years ago. The only person whose opinion matters to me is yours. Clara studied him. You mean that? Completely. Then we'll go. But not until after harvest. I'm not leaving the orchard when there's work to be done. Fair enough. She started to walk away, then stopped. And Landon, thank you for not trying to pretend this will be easy. It won't be, but we'll handle it. Yeah, Clara said. I think we will. August brought the harvest, and it was the best the orchard had seen in a decade. The apples came in clean and heavy, the workers kept pace, and Clara moved through it all with a confidence Landon had never seen before. This was her element. This was what she'd been building toward her entire life. They worked 18-hour days, all of them, and at night Landon would collapse into bed, barely able to move. But it was good exhaustion, the kind that came from accomplishment rather than defeat. One night, too tired to make it to his room, he fell asleep on the couch in the main room. He woke sometime before dawn to find a blanket draped over him. Clara must have put it there. The gesture was small, but it meant everything. When the last of the harvest was sold and the profits counted, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open in front of her, staring at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves. What's wrong? Landon asked. Nothing's wrong. That's the problem. These numbers are good, really good, better than I dared hope. She looked up at him. We actually did it. You did it. This is your orchard, your work. Our work. You pulled your weight and then some. She closed the ledger. I couldn't have done this without you. Yeah, you could have. You've been doing it alone for years. That's not the same. Doing it alone is survival. Doing it together is... She stopped. It's different. Better. Landon felt warmth spread through his chest. So what now? Now we count our profits, plan for next year, and maybe... She hesitated. Maybe we start thinking about what our life looks like, long term. If you're staying, I'm staying. You're sure? You're not going to wake up one day and realize you miss the ranch, miss the power, miss being Landon Pierce, the cattle baron? I am Landon Pierce, I'm just learning to be a version of him that's worth being. He crossed to where she sat, pulled out the chair beside her. Everything I thought I wanted, the empire, the reputation, the respect, none of it meant anything because it wasn't built on anything real. But this? He gestured around the kitchen, the orchard beyond. This is real. You're real. The work we do together is real. Why would I go back to pretending when I finally found something true? Clara reached out, took his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated contact since he'd come back. Her palm was rough against his, calloused and strong. I'm falling in love with you, she said quietly. I fought it for a long time because I didn't want to be the fool who got lied to and forgave him anyway. But the truth is, I think I was already halfway there before I found out who you were. And now, knowing everything, seeing you show up every day and do the work and be honest even when it's hard, she squeezed his hand. I'm still falling, and I'm tired of fighting it. Landon felt everything go still. Clara, you don't have to say it back. I'm not asking for that. I just needed you to know. I love you. The words came out rough, honest. I've loved you since before I knew what to call it. And I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. But I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life being the man you deserve. I don't need perfect, Landon. I just need honest. Then that's what you'll get, every day, for as long as you'll have me. Clara stood, pulled him up with her, and for the first time since they'd married, she kissed him. Not tentative, not careful, like she meant it. When they broke apart, she was smiling. Separate rooms was stupid anyway. Completely stupid. Then let's stop being stupid. They didn't rush. They'd done enough rushing, enough pretending, enough hiding. Instead, they took their time learning each other again, building something that was theirs alone, founded on truth instead of deception. And it was better than anything Landon had imagined. In September, they made the trip to Landon's ranch. Clara was nervous. He could see it in the way she kept fidgeting with her dress, the new one she'd bought for the occasion. She'd insisted on paying for it herself, from orchard profits, and Landon hadn't argued. He was learning when to let her have her way. The ranch was exactly as he'd left it, sprawling and impressive and somehow empty despite all the activity. His foreman greeted them with barely concealed relief. Mr. Pierce, good to see you, sir. We've missed you. Thomas, how are things? Running smooth, just like you left them. Thomas glanced at Clara, curious but too polite to ask directly. Thomas, this is my wife, Clara. Clara, this is Thomas Garrett, my foreman. Clara extended her hand and Thomas shook it after a moment's surprise. Ma'am, pleasure. Likewise. Landon speaks highly of you. They toured the ranch and Landon watched Clara take it all in. The scope of it, the wealth it represented, the life he'd walked away from. He couldn't read her expression. That evening, after they'd settled into the main house, Clara stood at the window of his study, looking out over the land. This is what you left, she said. All of this. Yes. For an orchard that's a fraction of this size, that makes a fraction of the money, that requires twice the work. Yes. She turned to face him. Why? Because none of this felt like mine. It felt like something I'd accumulated. But the orchard, he crossed to stand beside her. The orchard feels like home because you're there. Clara leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her. They stood like that for a long time, watching the sun set over land that meant nothing compared to the woman in his arms. His mother arrived the next morning, announced by the sound of a carriage and the flurry of servants. Landon heard her voice before he saw her, imperious, commanding, the tone of someone used to being obeyed. He met her in the main hall, Clara beside him. His mother was a formidable woman, tall and sharp-eyed, dressed in black despite not being in mourning. She looked at Clara the way you'd examine a horse you were considering buying. So you're the orchard girl, she said. Clara met her gaze without flinching. Clara Pierce. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Pierce. We'll see about that. His mother turned to Landon. You look different, thinner. Been working with your hands, I see. She said it like an accusation. I have. And you? She turned back to Clara. You convinced my son to abandon everything he built. Quite an accomplishment. I didn't convince him of anything. He made his own choices. Did he? Or did you use whatever charms you possess to... Mother. Landon's voice cut through the air. That's enough. His mother raised an eyebrow. I'm not allowed to speak my mind in my own son's house? You're allowed to speak your mind. But if you insult my wife again, this conversation is over. He said it calmly, but the steel underneath was clear. His mother looked between them, something shifting in her expression. I see. So that's how it is. That's how it is. She was quiet for a moment. Then, surprisingly, she said, Good. I was beginning to think you'd never grow a spine. Dinner that night was tense but civil. His mother asked Clara pointed questions about her background, her family, her education. Clara answered honestly, not trying to embellish or impress, and Landon watched his mother's expression shift from skeptical to something approaching respect. After dinner, his mother pulled him aside. She's not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Someone simpering, someone eager to please, someone who saw you as a meal ticket. His mother looked toward the sitting room where Clara was reading by the fire. But she's none of those things. She's practical, direct. She doesn't need you. No, she doesn't. That's part of why I love her. His mother studied him. You've changed. When you left, you were searching for something. I thought it was foolishness. But you found it, didn't you? I found someone who saw me for who I could be instead of who I was, and that made all the difference. And what about all this? She gestured at the house, the ranch beyond. What happens to your legacy? It runs itself. Or I sell it. Or I keep it as an investment. I don't know yet, and I don't particularly care. It's not my legacy anymore. Then what is? Landon thought about the orchard, the work they'd done together, the life they were building. Something better, something real. His mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I don't understand you, but I suppose I don't have to. You're happy. That's enough. It was the closest to approval he'd ever gotten from her, and it surprised him how little it mattered. He'd spent years craving her validation, and now that something resembling it was within reach, he found he didn't need it anymore. He had everything that mattered. They left the next morning, and Clara was quiet on the ride back to the orchard. Finally, Landon asked, What are you thinking? I'm thinking your mother's terrifying. She is. I'm also thinking she respects me, which I didn't expect. Why not? Because I'm nobody. Because I don't come from money or status or anything impressive. You're wrong about that. You come from years of hard work and integrity and strength. That's more impressive than anything money can buy. He glanced at her. My mother recognizes that. She might not like it, but she recognizes it. Clara smiled. You're getting better at this. The saying what you mean thing. I had a good teacher. They rode in comfortable silence after that, the orchard drawing closer with every mile. And Landon realized that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he wanted to be. The months that followed were not perfect. There were arguments, disagreements about how to run the orchard, moments when Clara's independence clashed with Landon's instinct to solve problems with money. They had to learn to navigate each other's rough edges, to give space when it was needed and push when pushing was right. But they did it together, and that made all the difference. By the following spring, the orchard had expanded. They'd bought the adjacent property, hired more workers, built a proper storage barn. Clara oversaw it all with a steady hand, and Landon learned to follow her lead, to trust her judgment, to be the support rather than the solution. He'd sold the cattle ranch in December, keeping only a small parcel of land for himself. The money sat in accounts he rarely thought about. It was just paper now, numbers that meant nothing compared to the dirt under his fingernails and the woman who worked beside him. One evening in late April, as the trees were blooming white and fragrant, Clara found him in the orchard, checking for frost damage. I have something to tell you, she said. Something in her voice made him straighten. What is it? I'm pregnant. The world seemed to tilt. Landon stared at her, processing the words. You're about 2 months, I think. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. Clara, that's... He didn't have words. He crossed to her, pulled her close, felt her laugh against his chest. I'll take that as a good reaction, she said. The best reaction, the only reaction. He pulled back to look at her. Are you happy? Terrified, but yes, happy. She touched his face. We're going to be parents, Landon. Are you ready for that? Absolutely not. But I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Together. Together. They stood there in the blooming orchard, holding each other, and Landon thought about the journey that had brought him here. The lie that had started everything. The truth that had nearly ended it. The hard work of rebuilding what he'd broken. He'd come to Bridger's Hollow asking one question. Could anyone love him without his name and wealth? He'd learned the answer wasn't that simple. Clara hadn't loved him in spite of his wealth or because of its absence. She'd loved him because he'd shown up, because he'd done the work, because he'd been honest when it mattered and stayed even when it was hard. She'd loved him because he'd finally stopped performing and started being real. And in becoming real for her, he'd found the person he'd been looking for all along. Not Landon Pierce, the cattle baron, not Evan Cole, the drifter, just himself, flawed and uncertain and trying. That was enough. More than enough. In September, their daughter was born during a thunderstorm that shook the house. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, and Landon held her in his arms and felt everything else fall away. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's angry," Clara said, exhausted but smiling. "Just like her mother. And stubborn like her father. Poor thing doesn't stand a chance." They named her Rose, after Clara's mother, and they raised her in the orchard, among the trees and the work and the honest life they'd built together. People in town still talk sometimes about the cattle baron who'd married the orchard girl, about the strange courtship and stranger marriage. But the talk faded over time, replaced by respect for what they'd built. The orchard thrived. Clara's judgment was sought by other growers. Landon became known not for his wealth, but for his willingness to work, to learn, to admit when he was wrong. They built a life that was messy and real, and nothing like the polished existence Landon had left behind. And it was everything. Years later, when Rose was old enough to ask questions, she asked her father why he'd left his ranch to work an orchard. Landon thought about how to answer. He could tell her about the question that had driven him here, about the experiment that had become his life. But that wasn't really the truth. "I left because I was looking for something I didn't have a name for," he said. "And I found it in your mother, in this place, in work that mattered, and a life that was real instead of just impressive." "Do you ever miss it, the ranch?" "No, because everything worth having is right here." Rose seemed satisfied with that answer. She ran off to help her mother with the evening chores, leaving Landon standing in the orchard he'd come to love. He thought about the man he'd been when he arrived, hollow and searching, convinced his worth was tied to what he owned. And he thought about the man he'd become, still flawed, still figuring it out, but rooted in something real. The transformation hadn't been easy. He'd hurt people, made mistakes, nearly destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him. But he'd also learned that worth wasn't something you acquired or proved. It was something you lived into, day by day, choice by choice. He'd learned that love wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, doing the work, and being honest when you failed. He'd learned that home wasn't a place you owned. It was where someone saw you, really saw you, and chose to stay anyway. Clara came up beside him, Rose on her hip, and slipped her free hand into his. "You look thoughtful," she said. "Just remembering." "Remembering what?" "The day I met you, at the market. You were selling apples and your father was being himself." "Yes, I remember." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because that's the day everything changed. I just didn't know it yet." Clara smiled. "Neither did I. I just thought you were some drifter who'd be gone in a week. And instead, you got stuck with me." "Lucky me." She said it without irony, and Landon felt gratitude wash over him. "Lucky us," he corrected. They stood there as the sun set over the orchard, their daughter between them, the work of the day done, and the work of tomorrow waiting. It wasn't perfect. It was never perfect. But it was theirs, built on truth and effort, and the kind of love that grew slowly, rooted deep. And sometimes, Landon thought, that was the whole point. You didn't find yourself by running away. You found yourself by showing up, day after day, and doing the work of becoming someone worth being. He'd left everything to discover that. And he'd do it again in a heartbeat, because in the end, the question he'd been asking, whether anyone could love him without his wealth, had been the wrong question all along. The right question was whether he could love himself enough to be honest, to be vulnerable, to show up as he really was instead of who he thought he should be. And the answer, hard-won and precious, was standing right beside him.